Hey, this is my garden tour, September 2020. I want to show you a little bit of what we do here in Chad. Right now we're in the capital city of Jamena. This is my city garden. In the dry season, there's nothing here but brown dirt. You have to look up to see any greenery where the trees are. But right now we get loads and loads of rainfall for about 4 months, and so it's lush. So let's start with a little explanation of what we've done here. I'm standing on a concrete slab. We dug out a septic tank last year, and so all of this ground was covered with subsoil, just clay that came from 6-8 meters down the ground. It was not garden soil. So how did we do this? We did a wooden core garden bed. Come up real close. You can see we have logs here. We laid down logs to delineate our garden beds. We dug out about 10 centimeters of topsoil, or not topsoil, but whatever was on the top, laid down branches and leaves, covered it with dirt, and then put down a very, very thin layer of compost. And since the soil was light and airy and had just been laid down, that compost was easily able to inoculate all of the soil underneath that had lots of wood, branches, leaves in it, and it produces very well even in the first season. We've even got some earthworms in there, lots and lots of bugs. So what do we have going on? This is okra. We major on native vegetables. They're the most encouraging thing to grow. They're also really beautiful. The beautiful flowers. Here's an okra growing right there. In the back we have corn, and this is corn I saved for seed. You can see there's a sweet potato vine wrapped around it. That's a sign that says, nobody picked this, I'm leaving it for seed. So we've already eaten all of our fresh corn this year, but this will be my seed for next year. I'm fairly happy with that. The crickets have eaten, the locusts have eaten the top, but that's okay. We have plenty of good seed the garden will plant next year. Moving on here, so this is a semicircular bed right here that goes around the palm tree. In the inside of the circle we have our corn, on the outside of the circle we have okra. So just follow me in here. Here's okra. We can pick this. Some up here. We're going to thread through on the left. We have another square bed. You can't tell the shapes of the beds anymore because the squash have covered it all. We have squash growing up here. We have long beans. So these are Asian long purple beans that we harvest loads of. These right now I'm leaving for seed, but we've been eating them every single day. They just produce like crazy. There we have more long beans hanging off of the sweet sorghum stalks. Here, show them the top of the sorghum stalks here. There's heads of sorghum. Now this is not a grain sorghum. We grow this for the stalk. We eat it like sugar cane. So as soon as those heads turn black and the seeds are ripe, then the stalks are also full of sugar, and we chop them down and chew on them. Now in the dry season, when none of this greenery is growing, we still have fruit trees. Here's a guava tree, and as you can see, it's loaded with green guavas right now. Right behind you here is a cherimoya tree, otherwise referred to as a custard apple. See the fruit here that's ripening. You go look up. This is a moringa tree, where we eat the greens. Probably the most nutritious vegetable on the planet. So it's a food forest, or if you will, a forest. Oh, another nice ear of seed corn. Happy about that. Next year, here we come. And if you hear that noise in the background, hear that? That's a kukul. Let's see if we can look at it. Where'd he go? Oh, you hear him? That's beautiful. found him. They eat bugs, that's all they eat. And since they've shown up, I haven't seen any locusts around the garden anymore. And that's been really helpful. And I've seen it's the second fledgling I've seen this year. And so they're nesting on our property, raising their young. And they're not terribly shy, as you can see. He just kept a few meters away from me. But we're really happy to have them here. And that's one of the solutions for pest management, is to attract the wildlife to help you out. Well, in addition to our cherimoya, we have a pomegranate tree here with pomegranates. So we're happy about that. And these here are trees that were large shade trees a couple years ago. But we wanted sunlight in here to garden. So we chop down all the branches and we make wooden core beds. So all of our beds all through here are made from branches from the trees that were laid down. And they're all squash this year. That's why it looks like a jungle. The squash just kind of takes over, in addition to the sweet sorghum. But the fertilities all come from the trees. We haven't brought in any manures or compost or anything. It's just branches and leaves that we lay down, and it produces fantastic topsoil. This is called the peacock bush, for obvious reasons. It's beautiful, and it grows really prolifically. We probably cut it back 4 to 5 times a year and lay the branches down either just as a top dressing of mulch, or I use them to make wooden core garden beds. But another benefit is that they grow a lot of yeast, and I brew a lot of beverages from whatever sorts of juices or infusions I have around, and I cultivate the yeast off of these flowers. It's been my most successful yeast inoculant. So you use all parts of nature. There's several uses to every tree. We're nesting kukels in here. It's providing fertility for the ground. It's also a nitrogen fixing tree, fertilizes the soil, and I get my best brewer's yeast out of it. This is another cherimoya tree. We don't have a lot. We just have 3 cherimoyas this year, but the tree was only planted 2 years ago. So I'm not complaining, and it's also significantly shaded by some of the trees around it. Oh, there's a 4th. We have 4 cherimoyas this year. This is all, well, you can see some squash leaves here, but the main crop that was planted here is sweet potato as ground cover. So sweet potato vines are everywhere here, and I use it as a ground cover. Sometimes I'll see a nice thick stem where there's obviously some sweet potatoes there, and I'll dig them up, but mostly the sweet potatoes are just here to cover the earth and create fertility. They create a lot of leaf fall. So if I were to take soil here from where the sweet potatoes have been growing for several years, you know, they've created just a lovely, crumbly, composty topsoil. So when I start a new wood core garden, I'm using very poor soil. I'm using probably subsoil and clay, just layering it with wood and leaves. And so I'll come to a place like here that's underneath a tree, that's got plenty of mulch, that's had sweet potatoes growing on it for years, and I'll just grab several shovelfuls of this, or maybe a wheelbarrow full, spread out as a real thin layer over the top of my new wood core garden bed, and it inoculates it with all the biology. That's why we have such fertility even in the first year of a brand new garden bed. It's because we're also growing inoculant on site. These are zucchini. In this high humidity, they don't grow to maturity, so we eat baby zucchini. This is the prayer chapel, and we have some flooding issues inside the prayer chapel, and so we've just dug a moat all the way around it. Sort of counterintuitive, if you have a flooding issue, often people want to evacuate the water somewhere else. Our strategy was the opposite. We want to keep it right here. It'll feed these trees, it will produce organic material, it will grow vegetables. And fruit. For instance, here's a banana tree. This banana was placed in a pile of mulch 3 years ago. We've had a banana crop 2 years in a row from these trees, and I'm expecting them to blossom again any day now for the 3rd year. Here's another big cassia tree that has been pruned back dramatically, and all its branches used to create topsoil. These are papaya trees that have popped up out of compost that we threw out, or kitchen scraps. I don't know where the seeds came from, but we have a good 6 papaya trees just popping up here. That's the beauty of rainy season. Stuff just grows on its own. They'll be transplanted out and then really babied through the dry season to keep them alive. Not wanting to waste any resources, when we dug out the moat around the chapel, what we have was a nice mound of aerated soil, so we immediately planted sweet potatoes. Now this will be to produce a crop of tubers because they have nice aerated mounds of soil that's very fertile, because we've been investing in this land for several years now, and we'll get a good sweet potato crop out of these mounds. This is a mother papaya tree. It's got lots of baby papayas on it. It's very tall, 2 years old. Growing really well next to a mango tree. Now in dry season, papaya really struggle because they're a humid climate tree. But being right next to this mango tree helps create a bit of a moister microclimate. This mango tree was nearly dead when we first moved here. The leaves were literally turning brown and falling off. All we did was dig a big pit around the base of the tree and fill it with branches and leaves. Nothing else. It's come back. I pruned it 2 years in a row, and it's producing bumper crops now. So that's the power of mulch and just putting down organic material. So we have a new banana tree that's been planted here, surrounded with a ground cover of sweet potatoes. So in the dry season, we'll have to irrigate the banana tree, but that means the sweet potatoes will also thrive from the excess water that soaks out laterally in the soil, and that will remain a ground cover. Otherwise, in the dry season, all that will remain is this bush and this guava tree. Here is my continuous compost system. Continually composting here. What does that mean? That means I don't have a dedicated compost pile where I'm piling up compost and turning it and then spreading it. I'm simply putting my compost where I want it. In this case, it's to fertilize a mango tree. So our kitchen scraps are placed underneath piles of leaves. And if you get close here, you might think these are fly maggots, but they're not. They're actually soldier fly larvae. Soldier flies are a fantastic insect that do not spread diseases. In fact, in their adult fly stage, they don't even eat anything, so they don't spread diseases. Their larvae decompose things at a very rapid rate. So all we do is put the ingredients together, our kitchen scraps, covered by plenty of organic material, so you don't see it, you don't smell it, you don't know it's there, and the soldier fly larvae turn it into liquid fertilizer within a matter of weeks. This is another small forest garden. We have cherimoya, we have pomegranate, loaded with pomegranates. We have lucina for fertility, nitrogen fixing tree. We have some young moringa coming up. And in between, we've grown our annual crop of dragon beans, of which we have plenty. It's actually my daughter's garden of dragon beans. We've been eating them like crazy. Absolutely delicious. And we're leaving a large number for seed because we want to have an even bigger one next year. We're experimenting with different okra varieties. A lot of okra, local okra, is prickly and it's unpleasant to handle. So this is Cyril's, my son's okra garden. We're growing, this is a taller variety than what you saw earlier. It's not even producing yet. There he goes. But this is probably the most fertile plot on the property, as you can see by the enormous okra leaves and the depth of the green color in them. Okra leaves always tend to show lots of signs of being eaten by bugs, but they're never decimated. They're never just overwhelmed. They seem to host a variety of snails and slugs without any problem or much noticeable adverse effects to fertility. So you see a couple snails right here. Really enjoying this okra plant. And they don't eat the okra fruit themselves. They just nibble a bit on the leaves. Here we have more sweet potato as ground cover in a brand new wooden core garden bed this year. But the long-term element are pigeon peas. And pigeon peas are truly a pea, but they are semi-perennial. They live anywhere from 2 to 6 years. And they'll produce at least 2 crops a year of peas. They'll grow maybe 7 feet tall, 4 to 5 feet wide, and produce a crop of dried peas that you use as like a dried bean in stews. So I'm excited to get those going on our property. It's more of a permanent element that's producing food on a rotating basis, and you really don't have to think about it all that much. We're now on the exterior of the same garden. We just went through the interior of it, and this is the exterior path that goes around the outside. This is an amaranth plot. Obviously it's being overtaken by squash now. I'm not complaining about that, but originally it was planted as amaranth with a bed that's a good 40 centimeters tall. This is a brand new garden bed from this year, and the soil is just mind-blowing. Here in the tropics, with the heat that we have, leaf mulch that I laid down this year is already basically potting soil, just beautiful, rich, organic soil. Anyway, we have 2 types of amaranth. We have domestic amaranth from West Africa. You can see it's going to seed now. We also have the native wild amaranth, and they taste the same, so I let them grow together. The domestic have a little larger leaves, so you get a little bigger bang for your buck, but actually not, because you have to work to reproduce it. You have to harvest the seed, you have to plant it, whereas the local wild amaranth seed themselves, grow themselves. All we got to do is leave it alone and eat it. We just nip off the tops like this, the tender tops, and the tender stems and the leaves. You just wilt them, just barely saute them, and they're a delicious vegetable with a bit of salt, nothing else. We have our long bean trellis. Long bean trellis is weighed down by the invading squash, but as you can see, we still have plenty of long beans that we'll be harvesting. We have the squash is just beginning to produce. You have a female here. So this is the type of squash. It will be completely yellow. It will be completely yellow when it's ripe, and basically like a really sweet pumpkin as far as the flavor goes. Totally native, it's local, zero issue with pests, zero issue with powdery mildew. You simply plant it and leave it alone, and it does its thing. Obviously, it's taken over the whole place. It pays to go native. If you build your main garden structure with native plants, then you can add your experimental imports and see what works. So here we're on a pathway, and the sweet potatoes are invading. It's what sweet potatoes do. So we're going to cut them back. Now these will be washed several times. Actually, we'll pick the leaves off of them first. They'll be washed several times. Then we will pack them with salt and ferment them, much like the way you ferment sauerkraut. And they come out tasting a lot like seaweed, like maki, that's used in Asian cuisine. And we just use them as an ingredient in stir fries. You get dark brown colored, dark green colored seasoning that you add to your stir fries and soups and so forth. So nothing is wasted. We clear the path, but it ends up being a fantastic element to our cooking. This is a rain garden. So we have a lot of water that comes off of this roof, and it was causing a lot of erosion problems. So what we did is we eliminated this plot of land, dug out about 30 to 40 centimeters of soil, chopped down a few trees, laid up all the branches and leaves down, covered them with the soil, and then planted stuff into it. And so all the water coming off of this roof now is soaked up into a biosponge, from which, of course, is a beautiful decorative garden, also a source of a lot of food. We have our aloe vera here. We have plenty of basil for making pestos. And let's see what else. We have quite a diversity of plants, really just for aesthetic value, but also there's a lot of food. Like this is ginger, for instance. And the tubers, of course, are the ginger that we all know and love, but the leaves are also great in a stir fry. They smell just amazing, a wonderful aroma. This is cassava. We eat the tuber. Well, we might eat the tuber. My neighbors tend to pick all the leaves for their stews, so that's fine too. Right over here is the first production from our banana plant. This is a dwarf banana variety. As you can see, it's only about 1.50 meters tall, if that. And that's good for this climate because we get really big winds at the beginning of rainy season, and tall banana is a liability. They get knocked over. This is the eucalyptus tree that we chopped down to create all this topsoil with its branches and the leaves. And so I'll just come through here and chop off all the new growth, and we dry it as a cold and cough remedy in dry season. Very effective in calming lungs and anything respiratory. A lot of medicine in this rain garden, a little bit of food, and some aesthetics as well. Not to mention the bamboo, or maybe I will mention it. It does have to be irrigated in this climate through the dry season, but a great resource for building arbors and trellises and that sort of thing. This is Talitha's baobab plantation. We planted about 80 baobab seeds, didn't we? These grow to enormous sizes and produce a delicious sour fruit. They can live for centuries. So here's the future. Good job, Talitha. This is just a little patch of sunshine. We thought, let's do something with it. Put some, buried some sticks, planted okra, mulched it, and we have a little garden making use of a little patch of sunshine. But there's a succession going on by which it will become a perennial garden. So come a little closer and I'll show you. So among the okra here, we've planted cassava, which will take over after the okra have already ripened and gone away. Now cassava is a perennial. You can eat the leaves and stew. That's what a lot of my Chadian friends like to do. I'll probably grow it more as an annual. In about a year, I can harvest it for the tuber, but also a moringa, and it grows to a fairly tall tree, and it will replace. It's growing among the okra here, and as soon as the okra dies off, we'll chop it down, and the moringa will grow up in its place and be a permanent food source. But the nice thing about a moringa is that it does not have a dense shade. It has a very partial shade, and so even when it's large, we can still garden underneath it. In the really hot season, it produces a nice 50% shade to temper a bit the climate. And then, of course, if we come through and harvest the leaves for food, which is the idea, then it's full shade again, and we can plant a garden while the moringa tree comes back. This is an exciting ethnological project for me. This is Old World cotton. So the Bagirmi tribe made their own clothes for millennia by growing their own cotton and spinning and weaving it by hand. But it's been nearly lost. It's been replaced, of course, by New World cotton. That's the commercial kind that colonialists brought in. But I saw this growing in front of a house of one of my friends, and he said his mom still spins it and makes her own thread and rope with it. So I was excited to get some seed. We planted it and it's doing great. And we'll see how much Old World cotton we can get into production. This is a line of citrus trees that we have here. They were dying last year, so we dug up all the soil underneath, laid down mulch from trees that we had chopped, and now we're growing annual crops of cassava and long beans around the edges. They're producing great. We've eaten a lot, now we're leaving them for seed. Well, the ones that the kids don't snack on, right, Adeline? And as a bonus, the fruit trees are coming back great. Here, another year or two, they should be producing again. Also, serving as long bean trellises at the same time. And here we have a local native bush called a gidem in Arabic. It's a Grewia tenax is the scientific name, but it is a native, super hardy, drought-resistant plant from the northern areas of the country that produces tiny little orange fruit. It's so humid right now in rainy season it's not producing. In dry season it will produce because it's almost a desert plant. And they're really tiny and it's tedious to harvest, but that doesn't bother the kids. They keep them picked clean all year round. It's a great way for them to get their nutrition, just to come out and search for little orange berries. These are our lime trees. African limes. The kids love it. We just wait till they fall off the tree and they're perfectly ripe. Moving over here, some mango. Underneath the mango is pigeon pea. But this whole area here was just empty, dry plot like this is. But last year we just laid down a bunch of branches and mulch and planted cassava, lucina, lab, sweet sorghum, and it's turned into a forest in 1 year's time, with an overstory that we chop back every single year of albizia and terminalia trees, and this is where the fertility comes from. Are these trees right here that we chop back every year or every other year to create this lush forest floor production of beans, sweet sorghum, and cassava. Our main crop area, it was corn. The corn has been harvested. You can see the fertility that's here. It's just lush, with an overstory of sorghum and understory of squash. About 5 years ago, this was an empty plot that was just a clay hardpan runoff area. And what rehabilitated it was digging one swale through here. You can't see it now because we kept filling the swale with organic material and mulch over time, but it caught the water, it filled up, it hydrated the landscape, and now we have production every year. Where does the fertility come from? It's the trees. Every year the trees drop copious amounts of leaves, tall shade trees all the way around that are actually kept trimmed back to a large extent. And they are the fertility. We don't rotate our crops. We polycrop every year. We have squash, sorghum, and corn, but it's the same three every year on this plot. And it's always fertile, always a bumper crop, and hardly any pest issues. The fertility comes 100% from the trees that surround the property. Show me your limes, Adam. Oh, that's lovely. Those are lovely limes. They've turned yellow. They're so ripe. That's the garden tour. Hope you enjoyed it. Once I get back to the bush, I'll show you what I'm doing there too.